guided meditation, and I'd like to invite you to sit on the front edge of your chair, if that's available for you. And if you are lying down, enjoy your lying down posture. And so first I want to just invite you to feel your feet on the ground if you're seated, to feel your sitting bones on the chair. And I'd like you to just rock forward and back over those sitting bones. So just allow yourself to rock over those sitting bones if you're seated. And now allow this movement to become more subtle. So it's just a slight inclination forward and back with the in-breath and the out-breath. And ideally what happens is that we relinquish our willfulness, and the rocking happens on its own, just with the in-breath and the out-breath. This very subtle rocking over the sitting bones. And this simple movement is hugely regulating. So anytime you notice that you're feeling a little tense or anxious or triggered, just this simple rocking is one tool to remember that can help our systems calm down. And so anytime you're sitting, or anytime you're meditating in the seated posture, what we want to avoid is shutting down this rocking motion, freezing it. We want to just allow this very subtle movement forwards and backwards with each in and out breath. Now as you're seated here, just notice the breath. Notice where you notice it. Do you notice it at your nose and your abdomen? Do you notice the air coming through your mouth? Do you notice it in another way? So be curious about how you notice your breathing. Now I'd like to invite you with the in-breath to allow the gentle inflation of your spine. So it's not from your will, it's from your breathing. To allow your spine to just elongate and stretch a little bit more with the in-breath. So like Amanda was just saying, there's the length of our posture. We allow the in-breath to elongate and the out-breath to contract. So there's a natural ebb and flow of inflation, deflation, increase, decrease with each in and out breath. So you might notice that there's two movements. There's the uplift on the vertical axis, and there's the rocking on the forward and the backward axis. Very subtle movement. So it isn't that we're controlling our breath, we're just being present with the in-breath and the out-breath and observant of the motion in these two different axes, vertical and horizontal, front and back. Now what I notice when I allow this gentle rocking, this gentle elongation and contraction, that it naturally allows some of the muscles in my back and my shoulders to release a little bit more. And as my muscles relax, I can feel the breath throughout more of my body. I can feel the gentle uplift reaching into my face and my neck, to the top of my shoulders, on the in-breath. And on the out-breath, I can notice the decrease, the slight contraction in my back, and the impact of the weight on my hands, in my pelvis, in the way that it arches. But I also notice that my pelvic floor is pulled up and back, which I associate with some tension, some nervousness, some contraction. It's a habit for me to walk around with my pelvic floor pulled up and back. And when I notice this, I invite the breath to extend into the pelvic floor without having any demand or expectation that it change or be otherwise. It's just washing with the breath, filling with the breath. And as the breath allows more relaxation in my upper body, in my neck, my shoulders, my face, my jaw, there's a tiny bit more capacity to feel safety and allow the breath into the pelvic floor and for the pelvic floor and the perineum to descend, to soften, to fill up with the in-breath and to relax and descend and release with the out-breath. The more safety I feel, the more I feel my breath filling up more and more of my body. The more this natural ebb and flow of inflation, deflation, of expansion, contraction, I feel in more and more of my body. Pushing is not a support. Expectation, opinion is not a support. Focusing on the ease, on the pleasure, on the release. These are all supports. So for me, the perineum is sometimes like a shy little creature, like a turtle that the slightest little startle and it pulls back into its shell, it goes into hiding. And so warmth and care and presence and ease all invite extension, relaxation, release. And just gently tune in to the rocking. As it stopped, invite it to resume. Staying with the ease of the in-breath, the release, the relaxation of the out-breath.
And all the things, all the years thinking.
So, I want to just give some context. In Satipatthana, the meditation object that we're focusing on, Joseph Goldstein gave 40 talks on this topic.
It's been around a long time.
Yeah, no, in one go. I mean, it was like one course study, it was 40 talks on this topic, not 40 separate talks over 40 years. And so the point of this is that we could be spending a very, very long time on this subject. So not to worry, just let it in as it comes, let it mull, let it soak in and, savor it, get what you get. Don't worry about what doesn't stick. This is one of these things like this chocolate cake that we can revisit it many times. It's a good recipe. So in review, last week we looked overall at the context of the Satipatthana Sutta, one of the most important suttas in the 10,000 discourses that the Buddha gave. We outlined the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We've got them up here. And our course objective is to create a culture that emphasizes our human connection and gives us tools so that we can learn and practice a limbic informed path of the 4 foundations of mindfulness for the point of maximizing joy. And there's a bunch of different kinds of joys. And so I've got this kinds of joy, and we've got these self-relational and societal joys, and I'm hopeful that this can be turned into a Google Doc and shared, and that we can crowdsource it so that as you become aware of different kinds of joy, we can each add the different ways that we experience joy in our bodies, relationally, and in our society, so that this document grows. None of these things are comprehensive. Remember that the sutta's omission, what it does not say, is that it presupposes that there's relaxation. And for most of us, this is not something that we can presuppose. For most of us, this is like quite a significant enterprise. For us to relax is not a small step. So my aim tonight is to look at mindfulness, the importance of the refrain in the sutta, and some of the specific details of breathing meditation. So I used Venerable Analayo's book, The Satipatthana, as a reference, and here is Bhikkhu Bodhi and Yanamali's translation. Majjhima Nikaya number 10 is the middle-length discourses. And then there's also in the long discourses a much more extended form of it with a much more detailed explanation of the Four Noble Truths. So I just want to reread the beginning part of this. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living in the Kuru country at a town of the Kurus named Kamasandama, and he addressed the practitioners thus. Sisters, Venerable Sir, they replied. The Blessed One said this, Sisters, this is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the surmounting of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and grief, for the attainment of the true way, for the realization of Nibbana, namely the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And what are the 4? Here, sisters, a sister abides contemplating the body as a body, ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. He abides contemplating feelings as feelings, ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. They abide contemplating mind as mind, ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetous and grief for the world. And she abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects, ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetous and grief for the world. And how, bhikkhus, does a bhikkhu abide contemplating the body as a body? Here a bhikkhu, gone to the forest, or to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut, sits down, having folded her legs crosswise, sets her body erect, and establishes mindfulness in front of her. Ever mindful, she breathes in. Ever mindful, she breathes out. Breathing in long, she understands I breathe in long. For breathing out long, she understands I breathe out long. Breathing in short, she understands I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, she understands I breathe out short. She trains thus. I shall breathe in, experiencing the whole body of breath. And she trains thus. I shall breathe out, experiencing the whole body of breath. He trains thus. I shall breathe in, tranquilizing the bodily formations. And he trains thus. I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formations. Just as a skilled turner or his apprentice, when making a long turn, understands I make a long turn, or when making a short turn, understands I make a short turn, so too, breathing in long, a bhikkhu understands I breathe in long, and he trains thus, I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formations. So we begin with the establishing of mindfulness in front of her. So mindfulness, the Pali word sati here, is not concerned with recalling past events, but functions as awareness of the present moment. This is Jnanapumika, Jnanavira, and Rhys Davis. Sati is required not only to fully take in the moment, but to bring the moment back at a later time. So sati is involved also with memory. But in the sutta, the primary concern is not memory, but present moment awareness. So it has many nuanced illustrations by similes. For example, when a cow herd is watching cows with a nearby ripe crop field, there's a kind of an alertness and a kind of vigilance that's needed to keep the cows out of the crop field. But once the crop is harvested, the cow herder is able to relax, sit under a tree, and watch from a distance. Sati was used to describe the calm and detached type of observation once the crop was harvested. So there are many different nuances of sati, but they can be summarized by the qualities of being alert, receptive, equanimous, observation. So I want to read the refrain. In this way, he abides contemplating the body as the body internally, or she abides contemplating the body as a body externally, or they abide contemplating the body as a body both internally or externally. Or as he abides contemplating in the body its arising factors, or she abides contemplating in the body its vanishing factors, or they abide contemplating in the body both its arising and vanishing factors. Or else mindfulness that there is a body is simply established in him to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and mindfulness, and she abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. And that is how a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body as the body. So the scope of the practice includes internal and external phenomena. Nature is to arise and pass away, we know that. But when we put the refrain as something that intersperses each of the different frames of reference, then what it does is that it highlights that impermanence and practicing with an attitude to gain understanding and free from clinging are the objectives of this meditation. It highlights, this refrain highlights that knowing what is going on in the people around us is part of right mindfulness. It's important to know that the four foundations of mindfulness looks at body sensations, thoughts, and feelings. We can see that. Feelings, mind objects, and dharma, that's part of it. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a sense of what's happening in these domains for other people. And so how can we know what's going on for feelings, what's going on as mind objects? How can we know the kind of contemplations that people are doing? Well, what we can do is we can observe with awareness other people's outer manifestations, their postures, their facial expressions, their tones of voice, to give us clues about what's happening for them. But what's important to realize is that the Buddha gives us the encouragement to practice relationally. That's actually embedded in the sutta. That it's not an extraordinary thing. It's actually part of the meditation. So the refrain asks us to contemplate the nature of arising, the nature of passing away, the nature of both arising and passing away. And by staying it in this kind of a way, there's a temporal progression which leads from observing arising and then focusing on disappearance to a comprehensive vision of impermanence. In the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, one of the other really important suttas, the Buddha expounds on the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, sankhara, and consciousness. And from this exposition, he concludes that anything impermanent cannot yield a lasting satisfaction, and therefore does not qualify as I, mine, or myself. Now, it's been always a curiosity to me that I, mine, and myself, according to the Buddha, needs to equate with lasting satisfaction. And if it doesn't equate with lasting satisfaction, therefore we cannot posit that it is I, mine, or myself. And so all kinds of stuff we grab hold of and we think, oh, that's me, that's mine, that's myself. And very rarely are the things that we're grabbing hold of and identifying with lasting or deeply satisfying on that kind of a level. And so it's just like as a kind of like highlight or a contrast or a question. You know, if we bring lasting satisfaction, if it's lasting satisfaction, then we can identify with it. It's like a way of revealing the kind of stuff that floats through that we grab onto. And we say, this is me, this is who I am, this is what I am. As some way of giving some context. So all of this is prelude. This is even before we've gotten to the meditation instruction. This is like helping us get set up. Breathing, body postures, clear awareness in daily life, anatomical parts, elements, and the process of decomposition of death are what are contained in the first foundation of mindfulness. And so in this progression, when we look at it, there's a general flow from the more obvious aspects of our body and goes into more details of what actually comprises and how do we understand our body. And when we use, one of the things that I really love about Analayo is that he contrasts the Theravadan scriptures with the Mahayana scriptures. And in the Mahayana scriptures, they reverse the order. And so they start with body postures, clear awareness in daily life, and then they go to breathing. And so particularly from that progression, you can see the progress from more coarse to more subtle. So Mara, or defilements, cannot overcome one with bodily awareness. So when our attention is rooted and suffused in our body, we cannot be inundated with defilements. So note to self. This is really important. Our agitation, our restlessness, our anxiety, our fear, it cannot take root if our attention is suffused throughout our body. So this is not like practice for babies. You know, this is not like what you do as like a nursery school before you get to kindergarten. This is like hugely important. And I can't underscore that enough, how important body awareness practices are, particularly when we're navigating limbic injury, to learn how to feel joy and pleasure and relax. So in the Kayagata Sati Sutta, they give a bunch of different examples. And 3 of them, I couldn't follow how this had anything to do with why Mara can't overcome one with body awareness, but 2 I could kind of get my head wrapped around. Fire can ignite dry wood. An empty jug can be filled with water. In the same way, Mara will find an opportunity in those not well established in mindfulness of the body. But fire is not possible to ignite with wet wood. And you cannot fill a jug that's already full. You can't add more to it when it's already full. And so Mara is not able to overpower those who develop mindfulness of the body. So in our day-long retreat, was it you, Michael, that brought up concentration? Or was that Miguel? Yeah. Venerable Analayo goes into this long exposition about the power of the 4 foundations of mindfulness as both a path of concentration as well as a path of insight, and then speaks at length about the value of concentration as a practice for purifying the defilements, which then sets us up for different ways and deeper kinds of insight. So I think you were actually right on the mark. I was just, at the end of the day, not able to respond more fully. Yeah. But because this particular meditation instruction can be used for both concentration practice as well as insight practice, is one of the reasons that Venerable Analayo is hypothesizing why it is so highly regarded. So of the 10,000 suttas, discourses that the Buddha gave, this one stands head and shoulders above all the others as one that is hugely important to know. Note to self, you know? It's like, this is important. We should know the sutta. So even though contemporary teachers don't emphasize samadhi, saying that insight is possible without achieving the deeper absorptions, the value of purifying the mind from defilements are many. And deep peace, pleasure, joy are some of the most exalted states that can be known in the conditioned world. So from our own personal perspective of cultivating joy, then any of us who are able to actually allow our minds go into unification are going to be able to experience that deep pleasure that comes from that. So from the perspective of meditation instructions, breathing meditation is one of the most widely used forms of meditation objects. And what was good for the Buddha is good for all of us. You know, the Buddha, he called it a noble and divine way of practice, and his own personal awakening took place while meditating on the breath. Yeah. So, you know, I like to think sometimes in these silly ways, you know. So there are many different suttas that talk about breathing, and there are many different systems of meditation instructions that deal with breathing. The 2 most common ones are the Foundations of Mindfulness and the Anapanasati Sutta. The Foundations of Mindfulness describes the breathing in 4 steps, and the Anapanasati Sutta contains 16 steps that can be broken into the 4 categories that we have in the Foundations of Mindfulness. So when we apply ourselves and bring the meditation of the breath into fullness, into fruition, we can experience insight, concentration, we can experience the value of overcoming worldly kinds of aversions and attractions. We can attain unification of mind, we can experience the jhanas, and we can feel and know directly for ourselves the liberation from suffering that comes from greed, aversion, and ignorance. It's good stuff, you know. So I also want to highlight that in the beginning of the sutta, when we set it up, the Buddha speaks about where are suitable places for practice. And he talks about at the root of a tree, in an empty hut, and in a quiet place. And so traditionally, meditation is considered supported when we are away from the hustle and bustle, the chaos, the input of ordinary life situations. And there's discourses that talk about, good places of practice, and good places of practice is where there's not a lot of work projects going on. So write off monasteries right away. Because they've always got a gazillion work projects going on, And so in our modern day world, we have teachers that instruct how to practice no matter what's going on, no matter where we are, to do breathing when we're standing in line at the grocery store, when we are at a stoplight, when we're in a committee meeting, when we're texting. It's like, instead of having this big, huge divide that separates practice to these formal situations and everything else goes to hell, we're interested in bringing the meditation more and more into the various different parts of our life. Yeah. The value is that when we do have a formal meditation practice that we set aside for time that is dedicated and is conducive, oftentimes what happens is that the depth of cohesiveness of mind is something that we notice, and we get the benefits of deeper concentration. So for this reason, it has been suggested, especially if you live in a household that's busy, or if you have partners that are noisy, or have needs of you when they are awake and you are awake, is to wake up when they're not awake, and to do meditation at times when you've got the house to yourself. So Deep Amma was one of my deep inspirations, and she never ordained. She never lived long-term in a monastery. She just did practice, and her home was her practice place. And she was like the patron saint of lay people. And mostly the demographic of her students were these Calcutta moms who were living in India with a gazillion children and all kinds of household duties that they needed to take care of, as well as babies that they were nursing. And she just insisted that they get up before everybody got up and had time for practice before the household chaos began, and to just have time. But she was also insistent that when moms were nursing, that they use the nursing, the breastfeeding of the babies, as a meditation experience. So that more and more of life becomes inseparable from meditation, and we're not split between formal meditation practice and daily life. So the two are true. It's helpful to have formal practice where it is clear and quiet and we are in a special place. And it is helpful to include daily life, as much meditation in as much as daily life as we can. So then moving to the breathing, the actual instructions on breathing in. So the breath meditation instructions speak about becoming aware of the length of the breath, but not to control the breath, to know whether it's a long breath or a short breath. And as the breath and the body relax and become calmer and more refined, the breath gets shorter. The Anapanasati Sutta explores the breath through the body experience of breathing, to feelings, to mental events and insights, showing that the breath can be a skillful tool in all of these different components of self-observation. Both the Anapanasati Sutta and the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, Satipatthana Sutta, experience the whole body and calming the bodily formations. The whole physical body as well as the whole body of the breath. So these are technical ways of understanding that our breath is not limited to the anatomical regions of just our lungs, but it physiologically, metabolically, energetically, it spreads out and reaches to the full extent of our bodies. As we calm ourselves, our nervous systems unwind and relaxes. And this is critical. And it's particularly important when we've got limbic injury. The challenge is when we're really wigged out, is that we often cannot focus on our breath. It's way too subtle. We need things that are much bigger and that are moving and that are not so internal, because usually when we focus our attention internal, our systems go into a reaction rather than into a settle. So as I said on the day-long retreat, when we're navigating limbic injury, we need to be selective about the way that we use these classical meditation instructions, because there are ways and times when they're not applicable. So the difference between concentration and insight is that concentration is focused on just mentally knowing the presence of breath, whereas insight is interested in the various changing phenomena connected with the breath. But what's important for us is that joy and happiness come with breathing. It's both a result of concentration as well as a result of insight. So we're in good company. We're doing what we need to be doing. So in review, Satipatthana, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, is a very significant sutta, as it contains instructions that support both concentration as well as insight. Sati is mostly concerned with mindfulness of the present moment. The refrain encourages us knowing each other and using our meditation practice in relationship. Our way of knowing others can be done by observing nonverbal signals. The refrain also encourages familiarity with impermanence. The awareness of the body progresses from coarse to subtle, from body postures, clear awareness in daily life. If we use the Chinese system, then it goes to breathing, the anatomical parts, the elements, and the process of decomposition after death. What's really important to remember is that for someone who has a suffusion of awareness in the body, we cannot be overcome by defilements. So, there we have it.
Well, I'm not sure my question is ready, but I was happy to hear that the sutta says that if your attention is suffused in the body, or however it's put, that there's not room for hindrances to come in there. Do you have any personal experiences of that you can relate to us? I mean, I'm glad to do the said it, but we got to test it out ourselves. And so I'm trying to think of my own experiences, and I guess I don't necessarily have a good indicator of when I'm suffused in the body. I've been dealing with my dog dying, and I notice that the more presence I have in my body and the moment of experience, the more, not that grief is a hindrance, but there's less room for grief to be there. But is it the trivial aspect that my mind is absorbed in experiencing the present moment that doesn't allow other things in? Maybe it's too much of an intellectual question, but it's.
I think, Michael, it's a really fair question. And when I read that myself, I went, really? Wow.
It seems so simple.
It seems very simple, and it's like, what's happening? But if I just unpack it with you right now, one of the things that I can notice is that when my attention is suffused throughout my body, one of the signatures of that is relaxation. And when I'm relaxed, then that also gives me much more resource and resiliency. And I'm much more able to navigate the stuff that otherwise sends me into anxiety or reactivity. So from that perspective, I get it. I get it.
It's like it's more expansive almost when you're in your body. It's harder to get locked down on these things that.
Yeah, but it's a fair question of how do we actually experience that ourselves, and so maybe that could be a question to mull or to ponder, is to check and see, is this true for you? So yeah, the Buddha said it, but is it true for you? And if it is true for you, how do you experience it? And if it's not true for you, what is your experience instead? You know? So very important. Yeah. And I just want to say that I've been thinking of you and wondering how it's been going, because I just, furry family members, it's not a small thing when they pass. So you've been on my heart, and so has your furry person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's better today.
Yeah.
It may not be better tomorrow.
Yeah.
Just to say one thing though. When I was very lucky. I was relatively new to practice, but I was still kind of fresh with practice when my dad passed away very suddenly. And I just noticed then that being fully present for the grief and the feelings that I had somehow allowed me to get process faster. So I kind of moved through that so much faster than my siblings did. So I'm trying to be careful to be fully present for my feelings for my dog.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Chris.
And also what's interesting is sometimes with animals, it can be, though it doesn't have to be, that the grief is deeper because the relationship is much less complicated, And so people can just get knocked sideways because of the lack of complexity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my other friends I was describing was a good kind of lesson on lowering the barrier between self and other, because it's like small kids you meet in the park. Somehow I more instantly bond with them just at the less of a wall to climb over. So it was a good lesson for me. I've never had that experience with an animal before. So,
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, Terry?
So I'm trying to use this first paper as sort of a touchstone, which is
The different kinds of joy?
the different kinds of joy, self-relational and societal. And I'm trying to reconcile it with so much of the practice being insular, right? It's so, shut off the day-to-day life and just sort of be able to have some time to go inward. But it seems to me that is so that you're able to go out again, right, and establish those relational and societal bonds. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Well, I think we need to actually start from a completely different frame of reference, which is that if we go to India 2,600 years ago, there is no such thing as an individual independent person. It just absolutely does not have any context whatsoever. So our sense of self is completely immersed, enmeshed, and wedded to all of these relationships of family, of clan, of ancestors, of location, of work, of whatever. So from the Buddha's perspective, from that time and that context of a traditional society, the isolation was a complete contrast to daily life, which was immersion in a relational field, okay? And so then we fast forward 2,600 years and we have completely ruptured relational fields. And then we have this imported meditation practice that says that meditation in silence is like the way to go, So we have ruptured relational fields where we don't have cohesive senses of belonging. And then we think that the way to cure this is to pack ourselves into a cave for 100 years and not talk to anybody. And that somehow that's going to be the way to complete freedom. And guess what? Maybe not so much. So what I want to do is sit in the truth of what is happening now, to bring forward the blessings, the power, the benefits of the Buddha's wisdom, but in a culturally appropriate way, that takes into account where we're at and then begins to give like parallel practices and paths that support us where we need to. So like, how many times have you ever heard a meditation teacher, what's absent in the sutta is they don't talk about relaxation, you know? But for me, it's obvious that it's not there because I deal with needing to relax a lot, you know? So I look at my own personal experience and I use that in contrast. Well, okay, yeah, the Buddha is the Buddha. I don't ever claim to be as smart as the Buddha, but the Buddha's not me. And I am me. I know what it's like having to navigate this, you know? And so that's what I'm constantly trying to do, is to bring the teachings into where we're actually dealing with right now in a way that gives us the ballast and the leverage to move forward into a place of wholeness that includes all of the blessings that the Buddha speaks about, but is not limited to just the context that he was talking about. And so that's part of the reason why relational happiness and societal happiness is on that list. Because let's take it another way. I was at another spiritual community with a day long the other day. And in one of my groups, I was in the group with two people of color. And one of them was like all over the map about the agony of racism, okay? It's like, it's what she's lived and breathed and had to deal with since she was born, okay? The instruction and the dialogue had no place for that. There's no place in that school that deals with systemic oppression as a reality. It's all resolved on the personal and the inquiry level, okay? So when you take a systemic oppression that you did not willfully have anything to do with, so there's nothing in your personal intention that set up the conditions for that, and you're trying to resolve that through meditation and inquiry, there's this massive disconnect. And that massive disconnect ends up being an additional burden that the people who are the most impacted by the oppression are having to carry. So for me, to put these things up there like that is like, okay, let's set the stage that we're not doing that. Now, to actually create a system that navigates the interpersonal, the relational, and the societal is not a small thing. But we can say that these things need to be addressed. And it is fascinating to me, once again, that the Buddha very, very, very rarely speaks about systemic oppression. Here we are.
So standard descriptions of Sila have nothing to do with that sort of thing, because there was not a class struggle like that in India? Or?
They had their own class struggles. They did, but you know, and the Buddha was revolutionary in his way by wanting to eliminate the caste system, by inviting women to be fully ordained members in a society where women had no autonomy. So he, in his own way, he was completely revolutionary and above and beyond what was happening in that time. But they don't have frames of reference for understanding that, like, you know, the Buddha speaks of, the Buddha, there are instructions on how to take care of slaves. You know, there's a proper way to take care of your slaves. There's no idea that having a slave might not be so politically correct. There's, if you've got a slave, there's a proper way of taking care of them. So we can't say that all of the things that the Buddha did culturally apply, you know. So there has been some movement in the way that our society is organized.
Can I just
Yes.
say, this is, what you were talking about made me, I'm in the middle of this book called She Said, and it's by these two New York Times reporters who broke open the Harvey Weinstein, you know, sexual harassment, abuse, all this stuff. And what was very striking to me, and I'm sorry this is a tangent, but it just really resonated. These women had, talk about limbic injury, right? For years, just sort of like had this happen to them and felt such shame they could not talk about it. And they didn't know that others had the same thing going. And it was like, you know, so there's just like scores of these women who suffered this kind of abuse for so long, and it was only after somebody, a few brave ones stepped forward, and there was this just rush of the Times had to get more reporters to take all the phone calls that were coming in after the story broke. I mean, it's this whole thing about changing societal and relational, you know, but you can't do it in isolation. It has to come out. So that's, I don't know, it just sort of resonated. I'm totally on a tangent, but it just really...
It isn't on a tangent because it's in our face all the time. And right now in our world and in the news, it's everywhere. And so, you know, for me to talk about, you know, part of the reason why this is an interesting class for me is that when I came out of the monastic life, I was heartbroken. And part of the reason why I was heartbroken was because it's devastating to me that I couldn't find a sense of wholeness in monastic life. I couldn't find a sense of community belonging, and I couldn't find a sense of wholeness, and I didn't find a sense of safety. And it's not possible to talk about it, okay? And so it's not possible to talk about it because the value is that it's supposed to be there, and that in order for monastics to continue, you've got to presume that all of those things are operating. And so it's risky and threatening to actually speak about what is really going on. And so in addition to the heartbreak, I've got this total isolation that there's very few people that I can actually speak to about. And so part of what happened for me personally a little bit is that I threw the Buddha out with the bathwater. In the sense of like, if this system creates this level of dysfunction, what's good about the system, you know? And so without kind of realizing it, you know, it wasn't a conscious, deliberate action. It was just like when you're heartbroken, you just kind of do what you do, and then you pick up the pieces afterwards. But part of the reason why this class interests me, it's like a redo. I get to be badass and speak my truth, but not in the way where I'm having to drink bathwater, you know? It's like I can say that these things are true and this is true and this is true, but I don't have to get it all mixed up. And that to me is healing. So this course is healing for me to be able to do this. So thank you.
I was interested in the Will Johnson article, and then I got one of his books, and this idea of movement, of, you know, one of the things that's always made me crazy, has always triggered me, is the instruction, sit down and shut up. And I don't want to sit down and shut up, right? I really just, it's really had a hard time with that. And so, I mean, you know, that's the instruction, sit still and be quiet. And I just really, it was just really great to read somebody who's saying, well, maybe you don't have to sit down and shut up, and maybe there's some, you know, maybe there's more to it than that. And I really appreciated that, you bringing that in.
Yeah, if you haven't read the article that I gave the link to, I would encourage you to read it because it's mind-boggling. The level of nuances and subtlety in the body posture, and how this simple thing like rocking can be so hugely important. And even though we haven't yet found how to do that without a willful effort, when we get the rhythm of it, it only needs to be this tiny little slight movement. But this tiny little slight movement ends up making all the difference in the world between us freezing and to being able to stay connected to what's happening, you know. So his work is fabulous, you know, and rather than spend, you know, half a minute on meditation, he spends like 5 days on the posture, you know, where you just, through the posture and the nuances of the posture, you feel the fullness of awareness suffusing the body. It's awesome.
Something I noticed from that, I went home and was working with this whole movement of the body, and is that I began to notice that it was happening anyway, that it had been happening all along, and that I just had been focusing so much on the stillness that I had kind of forgotten that the body was already doing its own thing, and that's where a lot of the relaxation began to come in, was that when I just realized it was already doing it. I didn't need to do anything. It was already there.
That's exactly right. It's already there. And so what we need to start interrupting is the mechanism that shuts that down, which what sometimes happens when we think what we're supposed to do is to sit still. Sit still means that we shut down that natural movement, and when we shut that down, there's all kinds of negative consequences that happen, you know? Yes.
I would like some help understanding the statement about like a full awareness, consciousness of the body really helps eliminate defilements. I'm struggling with that. I'm thinking of my own little simplistic example, so I'll give you one, but I'd love to hear some other ones. I mean, my current understanding of it is, if you're fully alive and present to your body, if I am, then one of the things that comes up is that it's changing all the time. And to me, one of the defilements would be, I don't like this feeling. I want this to go away. Kind of a grasping for some kind of ease or tranquility in the body, and an avoidance of anything that's unpleasant. But if I really watch both pleasant or unpleasant, I guess what I see is that they're endlessly changing. There's nothing permanent about the body. So is that what we mean? Is that what we're exploring when we say?
Well, I think rather than me answer, I think what we need to do is to each of us take that on board as like a question.
Yeah.
The Buddha says that this is the case, and he's given some examples that are similes that suggest this is the case. And so I think let's take this on as like a question in our own practice to explore, is this true? Is this true for you? How is it true for you? It might not be true for you. And if it's not true for you, what is your experience? So rather than take it on and try to understand its rightness, take it on and see, question, is it your experience?
Okay.
And then we can share. You can share with your buddies, you can share. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, for me, it definitely seems true that, like, if my awareness is totally suffusing my body, then it's pretty easy not to let defilements overwhelm me. But that's not the tricky part, right? It's like when I'm in ordinary life, or I wake up in the middle of a trauma space. That's the hard part. So it's like, it's easy to say that, like, oh, once you get to nirvana, then you don't have any problems. Yeah, but I don't know. That seems like, and it's been my experience also that, like, I had a couple of kind of related questions about your talk, and one was the idea that there's no lasting satisfaction in the self. When he says that, isn't he talking about the soul? I mean, and isn't that what they were talking about 2,500 years ago, like, a lot? Whether there's, like, this soul that each of us has, this atta, and he's saying no, there isn't. Everything's fluid and
In the Anatalakkhana
impermanent.
Sutta, he says that if it changes, it can't bring lasting happiness.
Yeah.
And if it can't bring lasting happiness, then we can't depend on it as who and what we are. So there's this connection between change unsatisfactoriness and not self. They're linked together. So in this situation, he's not talking about it as that the changeability is speaking to the soul. It's just talking about, sight and sound and smell and taste and belief and thoughts and, the stuff that comes and goes. But for many of us, we can have an angry thought and then come to the conclusion, I'm angry, rather than an angry thought is arising and I'm experiencing it now, which is not just splitting hairs, it's a different way of relating to what's happening, and that different way of relating to what's happening gives us some leverage, and that leverage makes it possible to choose where we focus our attention. And where we focus our attention then determines what we experience, and how we relate to that experience completely conditions our own reality. So what appears to be splitting hairs actually gives us a fulcrum to lift the entire universe.
I think it's very, I can do the practice of, okay, I'm having an angry thought, and that's very helpful in dealing with anger. And I can sort of hold it with compassion, and move through it in a way. But that's sort of a different thing than my awareness is totally suffusing my body. That's a different state that I can be in when I'm actually off in a forest or in a little hut, and I've gotten really quiet, and usually there's not other people around, and there's a total sense of fluidity and spaciousness and that sort of thing. But that's sort of like a different thing. But
So I think maybe part of what we're navigating is that the reality of urban living, with the electromagnetic and the cell phone and the texting and the flashing lights and the input and the expectation, is actually hugely difficult to have awareness suffused in our body. That I think when we're, I know when I'm in the forest or I'm by the ocean or I'm by a stream, it's like night and day in terms of the level of relaxation I feel, how much more of my body I'm aware of, the sense of ease and well-being. So I think part of what we might be navigating is not just a meditation conundrum, but a meditation in modern urban environments conundrum. And I don't think there's a simple answer to this. I think this is one of the koans that we all are sitting with, of how do we actually do this? Not as like lip service or like goody-goody meditators, but how do we do this? And with the different levels of sensitivity that we each have, it's going to look different for each of us.
And for me, it's almost a question of, am I being reactive, or am I using skillful filtering to deal with the assault on my senses that happens just when I walk down the street in downtown San Francisco, and that's almost like, I could get totally suffused and then just walk down the street and just be hit between the eyes by the stuff that I see and hear.
I think might be, let's put a question mark around that, because, I'm in the middle of this myself. I'm dealing with a bunch of health stuff, and the health stuff makes my more sensitive. And as I get healthier, I'm noticing different things. But so there's a question in that about if we are totally suffused, if it makes us more sensitive or more resilient. So let's put a question mark there and tag it and come back to it, because that's an important point. Yes, Louis?
Just thinking about my experience, it seems like I can't speak for whether it's impossible to experience violence. I've gotten there, but with both desire and aversion, it seems like if I'm experiencing those in a really challenging way, my awareness is located outside of my body. Like if it's desire, it's on the thing I want. And if it's might be a conceptual desire, then my awareness is kind of like, that's where I am. And if I'm like in my body, then my focus, there's less magnetism from the thing I'm feeling desire of, because there's maybe more ability to feel well-being, kind of like we talked about it in the one day, notice that things feel good, and less of a sense of lack. And on the aversion side, kind of the same. I feel like the more embodied I'm feeling, the more likely, if I'm feeling aversion, instead of experiencing like I'm so angry about that was something today, but the more likely I am to feel like sadness or fear that are kind of like the I don't know, the states, the feelings that are underneath the more like higher frequency kind of anger or more challenging kinds of aversion. And I guess the same would be true of what you said, Marcy, about ignorance, and if you're in your body, maybe you're feeling change more and you're not in a kind of disembodied conceptual space of fixing a concept.
So I'm loving this conversation, and I'm aware that we need to shift gears. So I would like, if it's okay, I'd like to change pause and move into an inquiry question that has us working with each other relationally on a particular prompt. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. Can I hand over to you?
Yeah.
Just 12.
3, 4. For others. Inviting some breath, inviting some noticing of being with this group of people. How the spiral is going to work is I'm going to say the prompt, and then for 5 minutes we're going to go around, and each person moving to the left will actually answer the question. So let's say we're starting with Terry. I'll ask the prompt, Terry will answer the question, then there's a moment of breath, then to the left, to the left, to the left. Did I explain that right?
Yeah, we need to start with somebody.
Continuing, going around. Okay, let's start with the person with the shortest hair. How does that work? All right. So the question is going to keep going all the way around the circle. So let's say you came back to the person who started. If you haven't heard the bell yet, you keep going. So it gives people an opportunity to answer it a second time, possibly even a third time. And just as a reminder, for those who are listening, can you stay present for what's happening in your body as you're listening, and not prepare what you're about to say, really then when it's your chance to speak, or really allow that answer to emerge from your real-time, moment-to-moment embodied experience. So that's what we're practicing here. So I'm going to shortly say the first question, and we're going to have 5 minutes to go around the spiral. Do we know who we're starting with? Mm-hmm. All right.
So how long can the answer be?
I think just take a minute to check in with yourself, like allow the answer to emerge from your body. Maybe it's a sentence or two, a breath, and then the next person.
In what sense is it a spiral as opposed to a circle?
The spiral is because you can build off of what everyone is saying. You don't have to repeat the same thing.
All right. Let me bring us into presence. Allowing yourself to feel what it's like to be with this group of people. Anchoring in this body, in this moment. Where in my body do I experience my intention to heal or experience joy? So where in my body do I experience my intention to heal, or where do I experience joy? Where are you right now? Where are you in the room, in your body? I'm going to move into our second question. When I am aware, what sensation do I feel? When I am aware, what sensation do I feel?
in with the person who is next going to speak in your spiral. And a silent moment of gratitude and appreciation for what we've heard and what we've shared in this group. May it be a contribution to all of our healing and well-being. And when you're ready, coming back to the big circle.